Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the heart of the issues that matter.
Giving you those essential insights you really need.
And today, our focus is sharp. It's on the immediate fallout from the recent U.S. military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Operation Midnight Hammer, as it's been called.
Yeah, and this isn't just something happening over there. It's brought national security, homeland safety right to the forefront instantly.
So what we're going to do is unpack this. We're looking at everything from, sophisticated cyber threats to critical infrastructure.
Right down to physical security concerns, border vulnerabilities here in the U.S. It's a complex picture.
Exactly. Our mission today: sift through the sources, pull out the key takeaways on how this U.S.-Iran situation impacts domestic security, and basically give you the shortcut to being genuinely informed.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so where do we start? The sources point clearly to the catalyst that direct U.S. military action, Operation Midnight Hammer. And it sounds like this was a pretty major operation.
Oh, absolutely. Massive scale. This was June 22nd, 2025. We're talking 125 combat aircraft, submarine-launched cruise missiles.
Wow.
And the targets were specific: Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, the key Iranian nuclear sites.
Fordo, that's the one buried deep. Right?
That's the one, supposedly 300 feet down in solid rock. And that's where the U.S. really demonstrated, a very specific capability.
Right. The sources mention 7 B-2 stealth bombers, and they dropped, 14 massive bombs?
14, yeah. The 30,000-pound GBU-57s. The bunker busters, primarily on Fordo. I mean, in total, something like 75 precision weapons were used.
That's not just hitting a target. That's sending a message, a very loud one about U.S. reach, even against heavily fortified sites.
Absolutely. It's a statement of power. And the official U.S. line immediately after reflected that.
President Trump called it a spectacular military success, didn't he? Aimed at stopping the nuclear threat from the world's #1 state sponsor of terror.
He did. He claimed it obliterated Iran's program. And he also made a point of thanking Prime Minister Netanyahu.
So the U.S. framed it as like a one-and-done deal, a limited strike to neutralize the threat, avoid getting dragged into a longer conflict.
That was the stated intent. Limited, focused, solve the immediate problem. But, that's not quite how global experts are seeing it.
Ah, okay. So there's a disconnect there. What's the concern from their side?
Well, the big worry is that far from being one and done,
right,
this could actually, pull the U.S. into an open-ended conflict in the Middle East. That's the phrase being used.
Okay.
And they raise questions like, what about the enriched uranium? There was reportedly about 900 pounds of 60% enriched uranium at Isfahan before the strike.
Was it all destroyed or moved?
Exactly. If it wasn't hit or if it was relocated, Iran could still potentially enrich it further, maybe secretly up to weapons grade. So the U.S. says obliterated, but analysts are saying, hold on, maybe not quite.
Right. A big question mark hanging over that. So the bombs fall, the U.S. makes its statement, but then the focus shifts almost immediately, digitally.
Yeah, within hours. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, they issue this bulletin, warning about a heightened risk of malicious cyber activity from Iran.
And the National Terrorism Advisory System backed that up with a public alert.
They did, reinforcing the same message. This wasn't just a maybe. It was seen as a very probable, very immediate threat.
And targeting what specifically? What are we most worried about?
Critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
DHS listed electricity grids, water systems, food companies, tech companies, basically the stuff we rely on every single day.
That sounds concerning.
It is. And former FBI investigator Bill Daley put it bluntly. He said, "We know they've looked at ways to try to get into our infrastructure, controlling water resources or water systems or the electrical grid. This isn't random hacking. It's targeted."
Okay, so this is part of Iran's strategy then. Cyber warfare as a key tool.
Absolutely. It's central to their asymmetric approach. They know they can't match the U.S. conventionally, militarily. So cyber gives them a way to strike back, to exert influence.
And they've gotten better at it over time.
Significantly better. They've moved way past just defacing websites. Now we're talking denial of service attacks, disruptive attacks, even destructive wiper malware that just destroys data.
And there's a history here, right? Our sources mention specific examples.
There is. Think back to the DDoS attacks on U.S. banks, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, between 2011 and 2013, or the really damaging attack on the Sands Casino in Vegas in 2014.
Right, I remember the Sands one.
And maybe even more worrying, back in 2013, someone contracted by the IRGC, that's Iran's Revolutionary Guard, actually got access to the control systems, the SCADA systems, of the Bowman Dam in New York.
Access to a dam's control systems. That sounds like it could be physically dangerous.
Potentially devastating, yes. Then there's the Mabna Institute case, targeting universities and government agencies for data theft over several years. It's not just about sabotage, it's espionage, psychological warfare, trying to track people, maybe even U.S. leaders.
So the cyber front is clearly active and evolving. But let's shift back to the physical threat here on the home front. Bill Daley, the former FBI investigator you mentioned, he warned about more than just cyber threats.
He did. He spoke to Fox News Digital, warning about vulnerability to, quote, targeted cyber attacks and terrorist acts from lone wolves. But he also voiced a really significant overall concern.
Which was?
It was about border security. He specifically mentioned open border policies, his words, under the current administration. He said, and I'm quoting here, "There is no telling how many bad actors are already in the United States."
That's a stark warning. Did he give any specifics?
He cited figures suggesting several hundred known people on terrorist watch lists reportedly crossed the border between 2021 and 2024. That alone raises serious questions.
Several hundred. Wow. And what about others who might have slipped through entirely?
That's his other major point. He estimated 1 million or more easily gotaways, people who entered undetected. His exact words were, "We just don't know who these people are."
1 million or more. That's a staggering number. And the concern is that some of these individuals could be waiting.
Yes, that's the fear. Daley talks about the possibility of terror cells being pre-positioned in the U.S. and waiting for an opportune moment to strike.
And they could be getting orders from outside, or maybe even recruited after they got here.
Both possibilities are on the table, according to Daley. Either taking directions from foreign governments, maybe Iran, or being co-opted after arrival to pledge allegiance. It paints a picture of a potential internal threat that's very hard to pin down.
And this isn't just theoretical fear-mongering. The sources say U.S. law enforcement has stopped Iranian-backed plots here before.
That's right. They've disrupted multiple potentially lethal Iranian-backed plots in the United States since 2020. So the intent seems to be there. Plus, DHS warned about increased risks of anti-Semitic violence and extremists here mobilizing if Iran calls for retaliation.
Okay, so we have these cyber threats, potential lone wolves, possible preposition cells, border concerns. It's a lot. What's the U.S. actually doing to counter all this?
Well, there's definitely a focus on bolstering defenses and vigilance. Government warnings are a big part of it. Those DHS bulletins, the public alerts from the National Terrorism Advisory System, keeping people aware.
Information sharing seems key.
Crucial. DHS and FBI officials have been briefing state governors, local officials, getting information down to the ground level so communities can prepare.
And what about protecting that critical infrastructure we talked about? The grids, the water.
There are specific efforts there, too. Groups like the IT-ISAC and the Food and Ag-ISAC, those are information sharing centers for tech and agriculture. They've warned companies, critical infrastructure operators, telling them, basically, shore up your defenses now.
So practical advice for organizations.
Yeah. Harden your networks, stay on high alert, monitor everything closely for anything suspicious. The EPA is specifically working with water utilities because IRGC-linked hackers have gone after them before, especially ones with weaker security.
And we're seeing local responses, too, like in New York City.
Exactly. The NYPD deploying extra resources to sensitive sites, religious places, cultural centers, diplomatic locations. Visible precautions.
What about Americans overseas? Any specific advice for travelers?
Yes, the State Department issued a worldwide alert, basically advising increased caution due to potential protests or actions against U.S. citizens and interests abroad. So be aware of your surroundings.
And the FBI is actively looking for threats here at home.
Constantly monitoring, yeah. They mentioned the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, saying there's been a tremendous concentrated effort against terrorism since 9/11, looking for both cells and lone attackers.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. Beyond the security implications, this whole situation obviously hits the economy too. How are markets reacting?
Well, energy and defense stocks have definitely jumped into the spotlight. Makes sense.
Sure,
Yeah.
potential conflict often does that.
Right. And analysts, like those at JP Morgan, they're putting odds on potential disruptions. They estimate, for example, a 30% chance Iran might try to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Which would be huge for oil supply.
Huge. That's 20% of global oil flowing through there. If that happens, oil prices could easily spike above $100 a barrel. creates a real fear premium.
So some companies stand to benefit from this volatility, or at least the perception of it.
Definitely. In the energy sector, you're looking at the big players like Chevron, that's CVX, and ExxonMobil, XOM. Higher prices help them. Also, Cheniere Energy, LNG, because liquefied natural gas becomes even more important, especially for Europe.
And defense contractors.
Obvious beneficiaries. Lockheed Martin, LMT with the F-35, Raytheon, RTX with missile defense systems, Northrop Grumman, NOC, making stealth bombers like the B-21. Increased tensions often mean increased defense spending, or at least the expectation of it.
And cybersecurity, too, presumably, given the threats we discussed.
Absolutely. Companies like Palo Alto Networks, PanW, and CrowdStrike, CRWD, are seen as crucial for defending against these Iranian cyber threats targeting energy, defense, everything.
So for investors watching this, the advice seems to be leaning towards energy and defense, maybe using ETFs for diversification.
That's the general recommendation we're seeing. An overweight energy and defense stance. Using funds like the Energy Select Sector SPDR or the Aerospace and Defense ETF can spread the risk.
But what if things calm down? Is there a way to hedge against that?
Good question. The sources suggest considering an allocation, maybe 5–10%, to things like gold, the GLD ETF is often used, or even inverse oil ETFs. That acts as a buffer, a hedge if diplomacy works and tensions ease, causing energy prices to drop back down. It's about managing risk in a really uncertain environment.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for you, our listener. We've covered a huge amount today. Those U.S. strikes, Operation Midnight Hammer, were clearly a major event.
Yeah, a very significant military action. But as we've seen, it hasn't ended anything. If anything, it's opened up new fronts, particularly in cyberspace and potentially right here at home.
It's a really complex, evolving threat landscape we're looking at. Immediate implications, long-term ones, for security, both digital and physical.
And understanding these connections, these dynamics, is just crucial if you want to navigate what feels like a pretty uncertain future right now. The threats aren't always obvious or conventional anymore.
Absolutely. So as you think about everything we've discussed, those bunker busters, the cyber warnings, the stark concerns about border security and potential threats already inside the U.S., here's something to mull over.
Given Iran's proven history and skill in asymmetric warfare, using cyber, using proxies, looking for vulnerabilities, how do we, as a country, as citizens, best prepare? Especially for a long haul where the biggest dangers might not be tanks and jets, but rather those hidden battles online and the potential for threats already within our own borders.
A challenging question, and one that highlights the changing nature of national security today.